والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. We begin in the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless our gathering. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to increase us in love for one another and love for His Messenger and love for Him. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through our love for Him and for this beautiful deen to give us success in this life and the next one. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here at An-Nur Center. This is my third time coming here. First time I came was a few years ago when we were in the old site. And mashallah, it's amazing to see how in a few years the community has grown, the beautiful space that you have here. May Allah continue to bless you and allow your community to grow in amazing ways. Just a background a little bit about myself. I am from Southern California. I'm born and raised in Los Angeles. I went to public school my entire life. I went to UC Irvine to do my undergraduate degree in electrical engineering. And when I was in college is when I first began to really engage with Islam in a meaningful way. I grew up as a culturally practicing Muslim. What I mean by that is that Islam was something which I inherited from my parents. It was something which I did because my parents expected me to do it, but it wasn't something which I owned. And when I went to college is when I really began to engage with my faith at a different level. And I'll spare you the details, but college was a very exciting time for me. I completed my studies. I worked as an engineer. I was doing dawah in the community. I was doing khutbahs. But in my heart, what I noticed was a lack of people who were born in America who could speak about Islam. Because 20 years ago, when I was in college, in undergrad, the only people who were speaking about Islam were people who were much older immigrants who had came, imams from overseas. And I noticed that they did not connect with the youth of the society. I decided to study overseas with my wife. I went to Egypt. We were blessed to study at Azhar University for a number of years. I had to leave, unfortunately, prematurely because of the revolution. So another exciting part of my life, I was there when Hosni Mubarak had to step down. And I was on the streets doing security. My wife was pregnant. We had barricaded our neighborhoods, and then they told us to flee. Maybe for another day, the Egyptian government put me in the prison for a few hours before I left the country. Alhamdulillah, I was able to leave. Came back. I was an imam for a few years, and something happened as I was an imam, which is I noticed that, so my training was in engineering, and I used to do cell phone design. So everyone has a smartphone today. When I was working on these back in 2008, Nokia used to make smartphones. So those of you who are older know what Nokia is. Young kids don't know what Nokia is because no one buys Nokias anymore. And Apple had just come out with their first smartphone, the very first smartphone, and my job was to figure out how Apple made such a product. And the point of me saying all this is that working with technology was very different than working with people. As an imam, I'm working with parents, I'm working with young boys, I'm working with young girls, and I noticed that their motivation towards Islam, their motivation towards their academics, their motivation towards life was very different across different ethnic groups, across different cultural backgrounds. And so with that, I decided to go back to graduate school, and I did my graduate studies in educational psychology. My engineering skills are not coming in handy now because I lost the connection here. Okay. No problem. And I worked as as I finished my graduate studies, I focused on adolescent development. So how do teenagers essentially come to see the world? How do they develop their identities? I focused a lot on positive psychology, which had to do with the way that teenagers thrive in the world. And when I left, I had to choose between being a professor in a university or working at an Islamic think tank. I was about to move to Pakistan, to Lahore, which I'd never lived in before. I'm born and raised in this society. But the 11th hour, alhamdulillah, I joined Yaqeen Institute for Islamic Research. Has anyone here heard of Yaqeen? No? Good, few of you. What do you know about Yaqeen? Anyone have anything? Because I was short demo, but
I think I've seen it one time. I forgot the guy's name. He was doing religious comparison between Christianity and Judaism. It was on YouTube.
Okay, maybe Sheikh Omar Suleiman. Yeah. So the Yaqeen Institute for Islamic Research is a think tank, one of the few in the Western Muslim world that focuses on a couple of things. So what I'm speaking about today will be, and so I joined Yaqeen to essentially do scientific research on Muslims, to understand how do Muslims operate in the modern world. What do Muslims believe? What do Muslims do? And what is actually helping Muslims thrive versus what is making Muslims actually suffer from any sort of ailments, whether that be things that have to do with poor mental health or poor well-being, bad outcomes in dunyawi terms, and of course, most importantly, in the religious sense. So I joined and I direct a department called the Department of Psychospirituality and Data. So we gather data on Muslims all over the world, and then we use that to write research papers and come up with solutions. So this paper I'm presenting today was a part of this project on understanding Muslim religiosity. This is the website. You can see Yaqeen Institute for Islamic Research. We're a think tank that is global now. I think we're in about 60 or 70 countries. We get millions and millions of interactions on our website daily, from Zimbabwe to Saudi Arabia to Egypt to Pakistan to the US to Canada, UK, everywhere around the world. We're a resource for Muslims looking for answers about their faith. So we do three things. We try to find answers and write research papers, make infographics, videos that nurture Iman. That's the first thing. How do we nurture Iman in people? The second thing is, how do we dismantle doubts? So people in the modern world have a lot of different shubuhat, right? A lot of doubts about what do I really believe about Islam? Things to do with women's rights, things to do with the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, things to do with the existence of evil, all the things that commonly plague the modern world. We try to address those misconceptions. And the third thing we try to do is inspire Muslims to be valuable contributors to the world. And that's to reclaim our status as being leaders of the world. So if you go to the website, yaqeeninstitute.org, you can find our research papers. So we have hundreds of papers on different topics. You can watch thousands of videos that we record throughout the year. We have a podcast. I think we're in season 2 now. There's infographics. There's a high school curriculum. A Sunday school, we have a curriculum for Sunday schools. There's a lot of resources. We can talk about that later, inshallah. But today my talk is going to be about a paper I wrote a few years ago, and which is now, alhamdulillah, been used in universities and seminaries all over North America. And it's called Will My Children Be Muslim? And this is a paper that this presentation is looking at what do we know in the Western world that influences the religiosity of young people. And so this data that a lot of it's based on is not on Muslims, because before, when I wrote this paper in 2020, in January, there was almost no data on Muslim youth. And now over the last year and a half, we've gathered thousands and thousands of data points. So inshallah, we'll have some of our own studies coming out. But that's just a quick intro to who I am and what Yaqeen is about. Maybe any questions before I go into the presentation? I'm very happy to be interactive. I don't need you to sit quietly and listen. I prefer people ask questions or I ask questions. So if you don't want to be put on the spot, then it's better to raise your hand and to ask a question. This way I feel like it's a two-way conversation rather than a lecture. Yes, mashallah. First question. Why do we Salli? Pray? We can get to that. It's a good question. So inshallah, at the end of the presentation, we'll get to it. Okay? Good question. MashaAllah. See? He's braver than everyone else in the audience. MashaAllah. Yes?
If I was hearing correctly, I think I heard you say you went to prison.
Yes. Yes.
Is it bad there?
The prison can be a bad place. Alhamdulillah, mine was just an airport prison, so it wasn't too bad. Yeah, but it can be very, very bad. Yeah. But very good people go to prison too, just so you know. Like Yusuf alayhi salam. So it's not only bad people who go to prison. Righteous people get sent to prison very often. In fact, some of the best people in history, they go to prison. Because bad people, bad governments don't like good people, so they throw them in prison. Right? So just because someone's in prison doesn't make them good or bad. They could be the best of people or they could be otherwise. So. No problem. Good question. Now I feel like people want to know the prison story. One of many stories. Okay, so we'll jump into the talk, and then please, at any point in time, stop me. This is meant to be like a conversation, and I have a lot to present, so I don't need to go through all of it. It's more important that the questions that you have, that we address those, inshallah. So this question, where does it come from? So the first thing I did when I joined Yaqeen was I told them, I said, look, you're here to understand Muslim youth, you understand Muslim religiosity. We don't know is what in the modern world is affecting the religiosity of Muslims. So this was an investigation into that. And so I started by looking at what are the trends in our society. About 100 years ago, the entire country, in fact probably most of the world, was belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whether they were Christian, Jewish, Muslim, any other faith. It was something taken for granted everywhere. Harvard University, Princeton, all the universities in America were founded on religious principles. They taught religion in those universities, and the goal of the university was to raise morally upright people who would be useful citizens in the world. And so we look here at this chart, and this is the rate just from 1970. I'm not going to go all the way back to 1900. Every year, there's a survey that's done of Americans. And this is called the General Social Survey. And they ask about thousands of random Americans a number of questions about their lives. And one of them is, which religion are you affiliated with? And so if you look back in 1972, it's a long time ago for some of you, only about 5 out of every 100 Americans said that they didn't have a religion. 5 in 100. That's actually, mashallah, 95 out of 100 are committed to some religion. It's not bad, right? Then you see, in 1973, 74, it's a pretty flat line all the way till about 1990-ish, right? So we go from 5 to about 6%, 5, 7, 8, all the way to about 6% in 1990. And then since 1990 on, you just see this linear growth of people who no longer claim to be affiliated with a religion. And the last data point I have is 2018, and now we're at about 25%. So now we went from 95 out of 100 people said they believed in a religion, right? And now we have, it's 75, right, out of 100. That's a huge decrease in the amount of people who associate with a religion. So we know there's a trend in America towards people abandoning organized religion, so to speak. In Europe, it's even more so. So you might say, some of you sitting here say, that's the non-Muslims, right? That's not us. We are, mashallah, we're committed to our faith. And alhamdulillah, the Muslim numbers are better. But we actually do have some data, and we are finding that 1 out of 5 children who are raised as Muslim do not identify as Muslims in adulthood. That's actually quite alarming. That 1 out of 5 Muslim kids who went to the masjid, who went to Sunday school, when they grow up and they're asked, what is your religion? They will say, I don't have a religion anymore. So this is not a problem that is about Christians and Jews and Buddhists and other Americans. This is a problem that includes us as Muslims as well. I work in the university, I've been around the country, these same problems we see all the time. And so my entire talk, I want us to think about what are the ingredients for young people to become religious. And what do we mean, first of all, by having a religious identity? Sorry, you have a question?
I was just curious where the data for the 20% is from. Is it like, I was just curious.
Yeah, I think this number comes from Pew, if I remember correctly. So the Pew Research Center is another think tank that primarily does religious research, and they gather data on Muslims and other faith groups. So what they'll ask them, what is your current religion? They'll ask them, what religion were you raised with? Right? And they'll find that 1 in 5 that were raised as Muslim no longer identify as Muslim at that point.
Is this in the U.S. or?
This is U.S. numbers.
Okay.
Yeah, so this number is a U.S. number. This is a U.S. number, but there is something called the World Values Survey that does 70 countries. They're finding some general direction of this as well. So even in Muslim countries, when they say, how Muslim are you, how important is Islam, that number is decreasing in many societies. So, yes?
What is the age range of the people surveyed?
This is typically adults, just people over 18. So those who said that they were Muslims in childhood, 1 out of 5 who are over 18 said that we're not Muslim anymore. Right?
And one last question also, because it depends also on the areas in the U.S., right? Because there are some religious belts in the U.S. too. And so this is pretty much across the board.
This is across the board, yeah. And now we do have some data. So the data I've gathered on Americans, so we see the big hubs. California, New York, Florida has a good amount, Chicago. So there are these Muslim hubs. But we're not seeing that those trends are related to location yet.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to find out. Right? So what do we mean? We talk about, this whole talk is about identity. And identity is a very heavy word, right? To many people it means different things. The thing I want to focus on is that for parents to know, identity is the #1 conflict that teenagers and adolescents are going through. It is the question of their existence from the age of 10 to 20 is trying to answer a question, which is, who am I and what is my place in the world? And that can be in many ways. Think about their profession, right? We were just in the car driving over here, right? And I asked, one of the teenagers here, what do you want to major in? And it said, I don't know yet. It's an outstanding question for young people. What is my place in the world? You want to know, what am I going to be? You know, what is my place in the society? What do I want to believe in? Who do I want to hang out with? And so the entire period of adolescence is a search for meaning and the search for my place in the modern world. So for this talk, I'm going to speak about identity to have three components. The first is this question of, what do I value? So who am I? What are my core beliefs? And what do I deeply value? The second thing is the religious practices that one does. So what do I practice? And do I actually, the beliefs that I hold, have I internalized them? Meaning, do I live by them? And the third is that, do I do this by myself or do I do it with a community? And as we learned that adolescence, a lot of it is about being around other people. So if Muslim kids are together, that's very different than being a lone Muslim in your environment. So these three things are part of identity. What do you value? What do you do? And who do you do it with? And what we do find with Muslims and non-Muslims is that religious youth do better than non-religious youth on almost every outcome you can imagine. They have better mental health, they have better grades in school, they get into better schools, they're more grateful, they suffer from less societal problems, less rates of alcohol, less rates of drug abuse. So being religious in America is associated with all kinds of good outcomes. And if you want to know more about this, we just published a paper, I was one of the authors on this, that looks at a global study of Muslims. This is the impact of religiosity on well-being. Sorry, you can't see that. Right? So you can download this from Yaqeen if you're curious. And essentially what you find is that religiosity has the biggest effect on all well-being outcomes. So lower anxiety, lower depression, higher well-being, better purpose in life, more grateful. So everything good comes with religiosity. And all the Muslims who are suffering, many of them, it's not only, but part of it is a lack of a strong religious commitment. So going back to this, when we say identity, what's important when we speak about identity is that we have a lot of different identities, all of us here. So if I ask you, tell me like who you are, you might say I'm a doctor, you might say I'm a IT person, you might say I'm a mom, you might say I'm a high school student, I'm a college student. So that's part of your identity. And so you could have a racial identity, you might say that I'm Arab, right? I'm Palestinian, right? I'm Pakistani. That's part of who you are. And that identity has certain behaviors that come with it. So when I say I'm Pakistani, what does that mean? What do Pakistanis do? Anyone give me something that Pakistanis do? Someone out of in the room, tell me what Pakistanis do.
Troublemakers.
Troublemakers? Right?
Just kidding.
We eat biryani, right? Right, we eat biryani. That's a practice. We eat certain foods, right? Right? We also have certain beliefs that come with it. I'll be first to say, Pakistanis are often, not always, cheap. Right? Part of our culture. At least I was raised that way. Always trying to fight. That's why I gave my khutbah today. It was written for me, right? To not be someone who holds on to my money, right? But our culture gives us values. Our culture gives us behaviors. And the culture also gives us people we do these things with, right? So you have your racial identity, and that's a part of who you are. You have your gender identity, whether you have a masculine identity, which I strongly believe in, and I promote this meeting even talking today about raising strong men and raising strong women. And gender is something which it's A or B. There's no C to it, right? Whether you're a man or you're a woman in today's world, right? And this identity influences how you act as well. It influences what you're gonna be when you grow up. My PhD, I studied why do boys and girls have different career choices. And so why do women like to go into certain professions? Why do men go to certain professions? It has to do with things to do with their gender. Women like to help more, so they'd rather be a doctor than a computer scientist, despite the fact both of them require a high level of education. So your gender identity influences what you do. I'm a man. I don't wear pink and I don't wear skirts, right? And even if society says that men can do that, that's not what we believe in, right? So my gender influences how I live in the world, right? I have my faith, of course, so I have that level. And I have some beliefs, I have some practices, and I have people I do this with. And again, any of these could be really important to me or not important to me, right? I have, perhaps someone believes in feminism, and they have that as an identity. Perhaps they have a political identity, they're Democrats or Republicans. Perhaps they have a capitalist identity, they want to make a lot of money. The point is you have a lot of different things that make up who you are as a person. Now, all these things, they come from the values that you hold. And when we say a value, I'm talking about a belief to you that it's an enduring belief that living a particular way is desirable to you. So an example, if integrity is a value that you hold, then you believe that I have to always tell the truth, no matter what. It's a belief of that in the world, I have to be a person of honesty. So I wouldn't just lie. If I just lied, then I wouldn't be a person of integrity. I don't value integrity. So the thing I want to get into here is that all these identities, they stack within us in different confusing ways. So some people, they might be like this person. Let's assume this is a person. This person, and the top thing is the most important identity, and the bottom thing is the least important identity. So they might say, I am an American. That's really who I am. It matters most and foremost to me. My national identity is important to me. And then I am maybe white or black, and so my racial identity. And then I am a man or a woman. And then you see, for this person, Islam is in there, but it's in the middle. So that person's Islamic identity is kind of in the middle of their persona. A second person, let's call this a sister in the community, Aisha. She says, I am a feminist, and I am Syrian, right? And I am a woman, and I am a Democrat, and I am an American, and I am a nurse, and then I happen to be Muslim as well, right? And then you have a third person who says, no, first and foremost, I am a Muslim. I also happen to be Indian, who is a man, right? Who maybe is a Democrat, Republican, or independent, whatever it is, and then so on and so forth. Now, what's the difference between these people? They all have these identities. The difference for us is, where does Islam fit into their world, right? Because we said identity is the things you believe in, the things that you do, and the people you do it with. So this person is kind of in the middle. This person is really not important, and this person is super important. Our goal as parents, our goal as teachers, our goal as a community is to raise children who despite having all these different, and this is not bad, I'm not saying any of these are bad identities, to have a gender identity or to have a political identity or to have a professional, these are all important things. But they all need to be filtered through one's Islam. So my racial identity is only practiced as long as it is in congruence with Islam. So for instance, I'm Pakistani and Indian. I don't watch Bollywood movies, right? Because I don't find that to be in agreement with my Islamic values. So I choose not to enact that part of my Desi identity. I'm an American, right? I'm born and raised in this country. So I'm more American than I am Pakistani or anything else. But my Americanness is not something which I wear on my sleeve every single day, and I champion American values. Because to me, those are not often in agreement with Islam. And so this is the point of this, is to say this is what adolescents are going through. They're trying to figure out, how do all these things fit into my worldview? And if you can get to that person, alhamdulillah. If you get to here, not terrible. This is really bad. We need to avoid this. We have a lot of this in our society, by the way. And what people who do this is they look at everything else as shaping their Islam. So any Islamic principle, they'll discard it because it doesn't connect with my feminist identity or my racial identity or my gender identity or my political identity. They say, I'm a Democrat first and foremost. Well, the Islamic value conflicts with my democratic value, so I'm going to go with the democratic value. Right? This is not what we want in a person. So the question that we have to answer is, how in the world do people figure this out in the first place? How does this happen? And it happens through a process that's called religious socialization. It's a heavy word. But the idea is that we all live in these different environments every single day. Right? And I'm just simplifying it here. So this is the person. Imagine that's a young Muslim child. And he lives in that first bubble, which is their family. Right? And the family is in a house, and that house has brothers and sisters, and it has certain norms in the house. But then they also live in a neighborhood and in a community. Right? They have schools, they have libraries, they have parks, they have whatever else is in, let's say in Escondido that's around. And then you have, beyond that, the state or the national culture and societal influence. And all of these are constantly trickling down values into the heart of this child through TV, media, friends, peers, schools, so on and so forth. Right? Now the good news is, for all those people who are worried about my child's Islamic identity, the best, most encouraging finding for us is that family life has the absolute strongest influence on the child's identity long term. So just because we live in an un-Islamic society with all kinds of difficulties doesn't mean that we cannot raise strong Muslim youth in our community. So we start with this. We'll start with kind of these different layers, and I'll begin with the parents. right? And the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said this in an authentic hadith, it's in Bukhari and Muslim. He said, كُلٌّ مَوْلُودٌ عَلَى الْفِطْرَةِ Every single child is born upon the natural disposition, the fitrah, to believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to live a wholesome life. But it is the parents who will make that person into a child, into a Jewish child, or a Christian child, or a Magian child, or any other type of a child. So there's overwhelming evidence from the Quran and Sunnah, as well as from modern science, that parents matter more than any other socializer in the world. And this quote from one of the books that I read, it interviewed 300 religious families in America, Muslim families, Jewish families, Christian families, and they said parents have only one good and hopefully effective way to raise children to understand and carry on their family's religion. That is for parents to simply practice their own personal faith naturally, for its own sake, and as role models for their children. So parents who are looking for a way to have religious children, and they come to the masjid, they say, make my kids religious, and they go to what? That's not what's going to do. It has to begin with the parent. And every generation does this. They look at the kids and they say, oh, the kids of this generation are this and they're that. The kids of this generation are only reflecting what the previous generation has socialized them with, what their parents, what their teachers, what their institutes have done. So parents matter the most, but how? Let's tease this apart a bit. So the first thing that parents do for children is they provide what's called spiritual role models. And so spiritual role models are where parents will practice their faith at home. And young children especially, from the ages of like 1 to, let's say, 12 or 13, they're incredibly impressionable by their parents. So young kids always want to make their parents happy and copy their kids. Right? I have a child who is 21 months, and I have a child who's 5 years old, and I have a child who's 10, and a child who's almost 12. Right? The 21-month-old child, when he sees us in salah, he also tries to copy the salah, right? And that's what he's looking and trying to copy what mom and dad are doing. The 5-year-old, they'll have to do that as well. As they get older, it's like, yeah, if I feel like doing it, right? Because now they have their own beliefs, their own attitudes, their own choices, and they're picking everything about their life, my identity, my beliefs, and my practices. So parents, number one, act as the first and most important spiritual role models. They are the ones who naturally teach their kids the normal ways of being. So if the normal way of being is we get up at 5:30 in the morning and we pray, the normal thing we do every day is read Quran, and the normal thing we do every day is get up and dress a certain way, and we eat certain types of food, and we do certain types of exercise. Whatever it is that you do, your children will create that as a mental model as to how they should be living their lives. The second thing that parents can do is they act as the fundamental motivators of their children's religiosity. Now, we're talking about teenage years quite a bit, so I'm going to be very blunt here and raw. Most of the challenges that I see with young adolescents, a lot of the problem has to do with their parents' lack of motivation for their kids' religiosity. What does that mean? In the youth group or in the Sunday school, we see this all the time. So you have a Sunday school here, right?
Yes.
Right? How many teenagers are in your Sunday school?
Not quite sure. This year, I don't think we have a lot. But
Not a lot, right?
Yeah.
So this is common. Why don't we have a lot of teenagers in Sunday schools? That's one question. And why is it that, and there's a complicated answer to it, but one of the most common things that we're seeing is that parents themselves are sending signals to their kids very directly, and sometimes indirectly, that religion is not as important in your teenage years. Why? Because this is the time to get serious about school. You have soccer practice, that's important. We gotta go to soccer and club soccer. Right? You have SATs coming up, you have AP classes, you have this, you have that. So the children pick up on the signal, well, mom and dad really want me to emphasize academics now. Right? And sometimes parents, we do this out of love for our kids, thinking that we want best for them in their dunya. But not realizing what they're picking up on is that religion is just not that important. And even though you're saying to them, it is, like, salli, and you're telling them to pray and all these other types of things, and you're doing your little cultural stuff, but they are smart enough to know that what really matters is I don't come home with a C or a D, because that will get mom really mad or dad. But if I miss a salah, I don't read Quran, I don't do something religious, it's not that big of a deal, right? And kids pick up on this very, very, very easily. So parents have to be committed to recognizing, look, the adolescent years are the most sensitive years of your child's life. This is where they absolutely need religious motivation and encouragement to go to youth camps, to go to youth programming, and to develop those in their communities. And it's not enough to say, just go. Facilitate the best environment possible, right, for your kids. So that's number 2, is motivation and encouragement. Number 3 is parent-child coactivity. Oftentimes parents will be very religious and they'll do their salawat at home and do their Quran at home, but it's a very individual practice. We have many kids who say, my mom prays 5 times a day. She goes in her room, she closes the door, she does her salah, she does her Quran, and the kids don't read Quran or pray. And so the problem here is the parent is not doing the activity with a child. And I'll give you an analogy. Any doctors in the room? Any dentist? Anyone who had to go through like an apprenticeship in their job? No? Not at all? Right? Well, if you did, would you like to go to a doctor who never went through residency? You say he read the book. He saw a doctor doing it, right? No, you need to actually get your hands dirty. So you have to get involved in this practice with your own hands to become proficient in it and to kind of end up owning it as your own experience. So our children oftentimes see religiosity, but they see it as passive observers. Okay, I see it, but that's not mine. Which is different than saying, let's sit down and do this together regularly. So you're modeling it in your behavior, you're motivating it and encouraging it, but then you're saying, we're going to do this together. So we're going to go to the masjid, let's come along with me, right? And then you have to find a way to make it exciting and encouraging, right? I take my 5-year-old, right, we'll go to Jummah, and afterwards, I'm trying to create associations. So after Jummah, maybe we'll go pick up some ice cream. He's 5 years old. In his mind, he can't wait, he loves Jummah now, right? He knows that when Baba says, let's go to Jummah, he knows what's coming afterwards, right? Now, I'm not telling him, like, hey, come to Jummah, I'll get you ice cream. I'll just take him to Jummah, and afterwards, I'll just pull to the parking lot, and I'll say, let's go pick up a scoop of ice cream or something like that. So I'm trying to get a way for him to participate and have some positive memories of that experience. And so, same thing with any other activity. Let's sit down and do this together. And we make it as a bonding experience. The 4th thing is providing those religious resources and experiences. And again, this is where I find parents happy to spend a lot of money on robotics camps, right? And all kinds of Kumon tutoring and all these things. And then the masjid says, please send your child, $30 a month for like this program. And it's like, astaghfirullah, $30 a month? Yeah, what do you think we are, right? That's showing you have to provide those experiences and resources. There are high quality books that are out there. There are high quality programs out there. There's camps you can attend. There's things you have to actually purchase and put into your home. So that sends a signal to your kids that this matters. And when you want something good, we'll get that thing for you that's good, that's religious in nature. Right? It can't only be we buy you like nice phones and iPads and toys, but religious things as well, you have to have access to those. So that leads me to a whole separate topic. You say, okay, but a parent can do that. I pray, I tell them to be good Muslims, I try to call them to sit and read Quran with me, I buy them stuff, but they don't want to sit with me, they don't want to talk to me, and every time we sit and read Quran together, it's a fight because they get mad because they're reading too slow, and I try to correct their tajweed, and they got mad, right? I'm sure some kids know what I'm talking about, right? Baba pulled my ear when I didn't recite the ayn correctly or something like that, right? It's not about this is just a prerequisite. But what's fundamental to all of this is the quality of that parent-child relationship. And this is what the research is showing. So it's not just having religious parents. It's having religious parents who also have a very healthy attachment to their kids. And so parental attachment is this, if you studied psychology, you know what this is. What this means is that your children feel secure in your presence. When the parent is in the room, the kid feels safe and comfortable. And they have no problem actually expressing what's on their mind, asking some questions, and they don't feel like when the dad or mom enters the room, okay, here we go, let's see what's gonna happen. We're gonna get yelled at, we're gonna get told what we're doing wrong, right? We're gonna get scolded, we're gonna get whatever it might be, right? And that's often the relationship that exists because it's cultural in nature oftentimes, right? In many Eastern cultures, that's very normal. And so parenting practices are also, we absorb from our cultures. It's normal in some of our cultures to dictate to our kids what to do. Children are not meant to ask questions. You just do what I say. In this culture, this is not the case. And actually in the prophetic culture, that wasn't always the case. Parental attachment is very important. This is a foundation of somebody wanting to imitate you and to want to live the life that you're living. Which then leads to the second thing was parents have to have frequent conversations about religion with their kids. In one of the national studies about this, they found that about a third of kids say they never talk about religion with their parents. About a third say they talk about religion once in a blue moon with their parents, and about a third said they talk a couple times a week about religion with their parents. It is only that group that said they talk about religion regularly that actually had any sort of good religious outcomes. And just to throw some numbers out there, I believe for Catholics, who are the worst in America at transmitting faith to their kids, less than 50% of Catholic kids grow up to be Muslim, grow up to be Catholic, right? So it's very low, right? Whereas for Muslims and Mormons, we're actually a bit higher, right? We're almost at like 75, 80%. So we're doing better. But remember, just because they say they're Muslim doesn't mean their identity is still very high. So the frequency of conversations is important, talking about religion regularly. But it's not a one-way conversation. It doesn't mean, well, I sat down with my kid every day and I gave him a lecture about religion. It actually needs to be a quality conversation that is bi-directional, especially with teenagers. Teenagers and young adolescents have their own views about the world now. They're being taught things, they're seeing it on social media, they're seeing it in the news, they're seeing it in their books, they're seeing it with their friends. They're being told 1,000 things about the world. So when they come home and you talk about religion, rather than simply tell them what you want to convey, there needs to be a chance for them to express what's on their mind. But what do you think about this topic we're speaking about today? And what are your questions? And if they feel like if I tell mom or dad what I really believe, they're going to get mad at me, then that means there isn't a healthy bond between the parents yet. They should be able to say anything. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu the kids in the room saw make the hadith cleaner, right? There was a man who came, a teenage Sahabi. He came to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu and said, Ya Rasulullah, let me have a girlfriend. Right? The kids in the room said, oh my God, right? He went to the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, a young Muslim man. Said, Ya Rasulullah, can I have a girlfriend? Right? What's amazing about this hadith is not, one thing is that how the Prophet answered, and that's irrelevant for what I'm speaking about. The fact that a young man could feel comfortable enough with the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam to ask that question in the first place. That shows they were not scared of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They were not scared of a Nabi, that this man is going to get mad at us for asking a question. And the Prophet dealt with him very, very, very gently, spoke to him, until the man himself concluded, Ya Rasulullah, I don't want that. I don't want to have a girlfriend. Right? So it's the quality of the conversation. And this is exemplified to me in the story of Ibrahim and Ismail alayhi salam. Ibrahim is a messenger of Allah, and he had a dream. And the kids in the room, raise your hand. What did Ibrahim see in his dream that he was doing to his son? Yes?
He got a message from Allah saying he had to kill his son.
Okay, so he had to kill his son. How was he going to kill his son? Yes?
The rope behind a tree.
The rope behind a tree? Okay, is something else around it as well? Something else happening? He's not hanging him. He's not going to hang him from a tree. Okay? Yes?
To cut his head off.
Yeah, he's going to slaughter him, right? He slaughtered an animal, right? Now, this is the messenger of Allah. The messenger of Allah could say to his son, come here, Ismail. Lie down. Command of Allah. No questions. Lie down. And he takes his knife and right, he didn't do this. So this is wahi. There's no if and or buts about it. Right? And Ibrahim said, Ya bunay, inni ara fil manami anni adbahak. He went and he told him, oh son, I had a dream. And in my dream, I saw that I was slaughtering you. He said, Fandur mada tara. What do you think about this? He's not negotiating with his son, right? But the point is, he's involving his son and trying to understand where his son is coming from. Is his son scared about this? Is his son apprehensive? Does he not want to get involved in it? Does he need to clarify to his son? But the fact that Ibrahim, again, has that relationship with his son, to say, even with the wahi, that I'm willing to talk to you about this. And he said to his father, the thing that he would have hoped for. That, Ya abati, if I'm not tu'mar. So tajiduni inshallah min as-sabirin. You know, Dad, do what you're commanded to do. I know you're a prophet of God, and that if God has revealed to you that this is what you have to do, I mean, then I'm happy for it to be done. Right? But the point is in how that conversation happened. And take from this that when you talk to your kids about faith, it has to be frequently. You have to ask them what they think about things. You can't simply be what you want to tell them, right, about the faith. A few other points about parenting, and then I'll move on to peers because of time. There's two big things that really, really, really mess up youth religiosity in America to do with parents. Number one is divorce. I think it's less than 50% of divorced parents pass on their faith to either child. The kid usually has neither faith of either parent. So divorced families, unfortunately, may Allah protect all of us, and just doesn't mean if you're divorced that your kids will not be Muslim. It just means that it's a big risk factor. It's a very traumatic event for kids to say, well, what I thought was sacred is no longer, that bond is not sacred. And so it questions other things in life, even to do with their worldview. So the parents who are going through or have had a divorce have to very closely think about how do we ensure our kids' faith, and communities as well. Because oftentimes what happens in communities is that divorced families, the socialization is different, right? They're often maybe not as included in the activities as much, invited to the gatherings, and that often also can diminish the type of religious commitments that their kids have. And this other one, this is for the young people out there, those who are married, it doesn't apply to you, but interfaith marriages. Muslim men marrying non-Muslim women, even though some scholars say it's halal because the Quran permits it, I actually believe it's not halal based on prior precedent. Umar bin Khattab, he actually banned Muslim men from marrying non-Muslim women when the Muslim men were living in minority countries. And he understood that Muslim men marrying non-Muslim women who live in a non-Muslim culture will not have Muslim kids. And in the US, less than 1 in 4 interfaith marriages leads to the kid having, right, a religion of one of those parents. So interfaith is a way of telling your kids you'll have neither of our religions for the most part, right? So again, if you're a man in this room and you do not marry a non-Muslim woman, right? If you've already done it, that's a separate issue, right? And there's a history behind that. There's a lot of it's different. I mean, 20, 30 years ago was different, right? The amount of Muslims in our communities. But for any young Muslim man in the room, right, or a father or a mother in the room, do not let your Muslim boys marry non-Muslim women to preserve not just their faith, but the faith of the offspring. I'll stop for a bit because we spoke about parents for 25 minutes. Any questions or comments to get into? Yes?
I had a question. This is a really great data that you're showing. Really back to the first slide that you showed, the loss of attachment to a particular religion, I think around 91. Certainly I have some thoughts on what may have been a catalyst, but are you gonna touch on that a little bit? Because there's also, the way you look at the data and the quality of the data, you mentioned a couple sources, Pew Research, but then there's just so much more data that a lot of social, like Facebook has from Instagram, and there's just, that quality of data is just, I think it's unparalleled, because what someone will tell you and what someone is doing are very different, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, I mean, I think all the things you're describing are very good. That one slide you had with the concentric circles of the family and the thing, how does that layer in? I mean, 50 years ago or 30 years ago, if my child was in my possession, no one could really get to them, couldn't get to their mind. But there's a phone on everyone's pocket, so they can physically be with you, but your child can be infiltrated by all kinds of ideas, and we see that everywhere, right? Yep. So how does that sort of layer in with this sort of model? I know you have society and culture and social media and regular mainstream media, but when kids are probably spending 40 minutes of quality time with parents, 8 hours in school, 4 to 6 hours on the smartphone.
Yeah.
I mean, I would almost invert that, right?
So I have a whole slide I'll get to on media and social media or on technology, but to quickly answer it, I would say no, this still holds because the parents are the gatekeepers to all the other levels. So if you allow a smartphone in your house, that's your choice as a parent. No kid is twisting their parent's arm and saying, I have to have a smartphone and give me a smartphone. It's your choice, and you have made a choice as a parent with a value that I'm going to accept this socializer and access to the universe into my house, into this child's hands. And I'll say this very bluntly in the room, giving your child a smartphone, especially before they're like a late adolescent, is like giving your infant fire and saying don't burn yourself. So we know now, I mean, you said Facebook and all this data, I use all this social media data, right? We scrape the data, we do analysis with it. We long have known before Facebook just got busted about a month ago for it, that this stuff is destructive to people's mental health, it's destructive to their religiosity, destructive to everything about their existence. We already knew that. The point is, being very honest, parents often find it as an easy way out. Well, you know what? I need to get my Netflix hours in, I need to get my work in, I need to go and cook, I need to go and clean. You know what? Keep yourself busy for 3 hours, right? We have made a value judgment. There's other things in our life that are more important. And so we outsource our parenting. And we are very happy because it cost us only $500 to buy the iPad and we get thousands of hours of free babysitting. right? And if you had to go and pay a babysitter every time, you would have a heart attack. Again, it goes back to your value of money, right? We often we're very cheap, and so we think about these decisions, and we make, and this, it is in many ways a financial decision. You could put your kid in some other enriching environment, you could put him in some after-school program or club, but the TV, smartphone, Netflix, it's much easier. $12.99 a month, you get to watch for 3 hours a day, that's a very, very good babysitter. So I will still argue that the parent and the family life will control every single other socializer. A parent selects the kid's friends early in life. A parent selects the books that come into the house. It's not fun and easy. I have a 12-year-old who can read 30, 40 books in a week. I kid you not, right? You know, she goes to the library, she gets a wagon full of books, she comes home, she reads it. My wife, half of her time she's spending in the library making sure there's nothing nonsense in that book. And how many times did you see the LGBTQ stuff all over the books? So she said she was scanning a book the other day. She looked at the cover, looked fine, skimmed through the book, looked fine, read the back cover, looked fine, and then she read the jacket of the author, and it turns out that he's like an LGBTQ activist, right? So okay, put that book back, right? So we have to do our duty. We are living in a world that is chaotic when it comes to the access to information. You have to be a gatekeeper. And if you're not going to be a good gatekeeper, I mean, it's on you at the end of the day. And I find it ironic that parents are willing to be helicopter parents today. Like, we micromanage everything our kids do, but regulate maybe like what media comes into their life, right? So not having access to YouTube is probably important for kids, right? Not having access to a smartphone is very important for kids. If your kid needs a phone, you can go buy from Verizon or something else the phones that have 2 buttons that call mom, they call dad. And if you call, it automatically picks up on their own. So don't tell me that, oh, well, my kid needs to get picked up from soccer practice. There's a $10 a month solution for that, right? You can go give them an old flip phone if you need to, right? Data plans and children don't go together, okay? Like dating and children don't go together, data plans and children don't go together, right? So some of the older teenagers might get very mad at me, right? But I'm telling you, this is to protect our, because, so I teach adolescent development, right, in the university, and this thing, I talk to the kids all the time. Adolescent brains are wired, Allah has designed us this way, so it's not a malfunction, to be risk-seeking, to be reward-seeking, and to be fearless. So they are looking for exciting things to do, and exciting things to do and risky things to do can often be very problematic. Any kids in the room here know about the annual TikTok challenge? Some of you know, right? What are some of the things in that challenge? Do you know? I hope you don't know. So there's things, so on TikTok, the app, how many kids have TikTok on their phone? That don't want to admit it, right? Yeah, this is an app, and right now, you're being there's a challenge globally for teens. You are supposed to record yourself in the act and post it on TikTok. And it's every month of the year. And I think one of them was like, vandalize your school bathroom, slap your teacher. There's a lot of other ones I can't say in the masjid, right? So there's a lot of really, really nasty things. But teenagers all over the world are doing this. Why? They're looking for thrills, right? So this device is opening a door to these thrills that they're looking for. And if you're not aware that they're trying to, like, their brains are wired for this. And you say, I'm gonna give you a very boring life. You're gonna go to school, you're gonna come home, you're gonna sit and you're gonna do your homework, and then you're gonna go and you're gonna watch 30 minutes of a TV show, and then you're gonna go to the masjid. Like, that's a very boring life for the kids. And then you wonder, why are they sneaking out? Why are they going to have fun with friends? Why are they going and doing all these crazy things? Allah has made their brains wired for this excitement, and we said, no, you cannot have the excitement that you need. So we have to give them environments that fulfill those needs that they have. So sometimes doing things that you might not want to do, like a roller coaster is a simple example, right? Teenagers love roller coasters. Parents hate roller coasters, right? Because now your brain is full of fear, right? You have an amygdala, all your fear responses going off. The teenager's brain is not signaling fear. So they're getting a thrill out of it, you feel like throwing up, right? Well, take that as your trade-off, or you can stay comfortable and let them find the thrills elsewhere in a way that you don't want them to have, right? So we'll come back to media, but I hope I touched upon your answer quickly. Other questions or comments? I feel like the teenagers here are like, he's spilling all the secrets. They're not smiling. They're not smiling at all. Sorry. Okay, second thing, friends. Right, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he said that the parable for the influence of a righteous friend compared to a bad friend is an example of a perfume seller and a blacksmith. As for the perfume seller, you will either buy perfume from him or benefit from the good smell he exudes, whereas the blacksmith will either burn you or your clothes, or the foul smell will rub off on you. This is something, subhanAllah, I remember as a kid, I used to always argue with my parents about, right? I went public school K through 12 in Los Angeles. And they would say, oh, be mindful of your friends, and this friend, he doesn't speak well, and blah, blah, blah. We'd say, oh, mom, we're not gonna copy him, right? We're not gonna do the same things. And we come to realize that this is impossible. You cannot help but model your friends in many ways. So in this case, the Prophet is saying, Islam, that you will end up, even if you don't fully act like them, you will have some of the smell from them, which means you'll absorb some of their ways of being, the way that they walk, the way that they talk, the things that they do. And so parents matter the most, especially from 0 to 12, because that is when parents control their kids the most, right? I have an almost 12-year-old, I still can control her quite a bit, right? And I know the time is coming where she's gonna be in a lot more control, and I have to give her that control. She needs that control. And because she will begin to pick some of her own friends, I can't say this is a person you can hang out with and not this person, she'll be in her setting. And what the biggest hallmark of adolescence is that parents start to matter less in terms of influence, and friends start to matter a whole lot more. So the first 10, 12 years, the parents have to do a really, really good job of instilling the values. So hopefully now when their kids get into later adolescence and they pick their own friends, pick their own environments, hopefully they pick good environments to be in. So a couple of things that are really important that people don't realize is how values are transmitted from peers in different settings. So it happens in all these informal ways. So it happens when they're at school all day long and they're doing group projects together. They're not talking about science the whole time, right? They talk about social media, they talk about their religious views, they talk about all the things happening in the world, political views, soccer practice, right? In all these informal places, there's a ton of value transmission between kids. And the research again shows that hanging out with not religious peers increases the likelihood of trying drugs, vaping, marijuana, alcohol, so on and so forth. And hanging out with religious friends, right, decreases all those maladaptive outcomes. There's been some really interesting studies that have looked even in Muslim cultures about this, and having religious friends long-term, right, has an effect on your religiosity. That's just the nature of life. We are who we hang out with. That's what the Prophet Muhammad said, right? Al-mar'u ala dini khalili, right? فَلْيَنْظُرْ أَحَدُكُمْ إِلَى مَنْ يُخَالِفُ. That the man is going to be, any of us, will follow the religion of our closest, most intimate friends. So your tight circle of best friends, you are gonna end up believing and acting the way they do, whether you realize it or you don't. And it can be very subtle at times. So if you're a youth here in the room, to recognize it, be very mindful of the friends that you pick. And if you're not in college, if you're in high school, you're not gonna believe me, but you're gonna remember in a couple of years, you will not talk to your high school friends when you go to college. It will not happen. I was very, very attached to my high school. I went to the same school, same kids from K to 12. For 12 years I was with them. Once I went to college, I hardly spoke to them ever again. That's just the nature of how these relationships work. So you think you're best friends forever? Like, find good people who have values that you can connect with that allow you to be yourself. It doesn't even have to be Muslim, but it means that they actually have to respect who you are and that you don't feel forced to act the way they act. And hopefully, if your identity is strong, to actually pull them more towards you. I had some friends in college, non-Muslim friends, who all of a sudden I noticed would stop saying bad words around me. They'd say it with other friends, right? That's what they would do. But they just stopped in front of me because they realized that I didn't speak that way. So alhamdulillah, I was able to have them change their behavior rather than me change my behavior to fit in with them. So it really comes down to how strong, right, your values are. So friends, parents, be very mindful of who your friends, your kids hang out with, and try to, and you have some choice in this. By setting up your kids with good friendships in childhood, it increases the odds that they will continue to have those good quality friends into adolescence. And stability matters. If your kids are jumping from school to school every couple of years, it's very hard to build those good, meaningful relationships. And so if you jump into a new school, you'll find whichever friends are available there. So the masjid is a place in the Muslim community, but like I've said before, it can't just be where you come for, like just coming for like an educational program, probably will not build relationships. There has to be social gatherings in our communities. I teach a halaqah to some young men in our community, and one of the things that we do is we do a lot of non-academic stuff. So we do like martial arts together, right? We do camping trips together, right? We do all these things because it's about building bonds of friendship rather than just intellectual bonds. So make sure that as a community, you're trying to invest in those programs. People don't realize it, but in the Prophet Muhammad's masjid in Medina, the Sahaba used to go and hang out and just chill. They would have like watermelon seed spitting contests. right? They would wrestle in the masjid, right? And they would do all kinds of social things. It wasn't just, I hear the adhan, I come and I pray and I leave. So make the masjid a place where the kids can actually socialize and do activities. When I was at Imam in Corona, the boys used to love basketball, so we had a basketball court, right? And so always we'd go to the masjid, we'd play basketball for an hour, pray for 5 minutes, and would even sometimes, on the big screen, watch like a Laker game, right? It's halal to watch a Laker game. I don't like the Lakers, but nonetheless, right? We could watch the game. And so you're building that bonding and that experience. Because either they're gonna do it with good Muslim kids, or they're gonna go do that either on their own somewhere, or you're gonna find non-Muslim friends to exercise that interest of theirs with. So find what your kids are interested in, and then inculcate that with the right group of Muslim kids. Even like my daughter, she loves martial arts, right? So I made sure to find other Muslim girls, and we created a martial arts network of young Muslim teenage girls, right? So she does Taekwondo, right? And then she does Jiu-Jitsu and all these things, and she's competitive, and she can be very, very rough and tough in a gathering that's appropriate for a sister to do that in, right? So we have to create those spaces that may not even exist today. So we had to make like my garage into like the girls' martial arts studio for like, a couple of years. Because we didn't have a place where girls could go. And slowly, the community, inshallah, you could do it here, right? You can have activities, you can have periods of time where it's women only, have women only programming, right? You can use some of the rooms. So try to find ways that friendships can develop rather than just academic or religious activities. The next thing to speak about, mass media and technology. And so what we're finding in this literature is that certain things are really detrimental to youth religiosity and identity. Amongst them are watching movies, like rated R movies especially. So there's been longitudinal research that young teenagers who watch rated R movies are less religious moving forward when you account for all of their factors, because movies are transmitting values, whether you like it or not. There was a national study that YM did, Young Muslims. It's an organization that's a branch of ICNA for kids, for young people, and they did a study on youth attitudes towards kind of nudity in movies and all this stuff. And unfortunately, a good percentage of the Muslim youth had no problem watching rated R movies with dirty scenes in them. These are relatively religious Muslim youth. They normalized that watching rated R movies with scenes that are inappropriate was to them not a big deal. So it was a very shocking finding, right, from that study that we had done. Of course, exposure to adult content was why smartphone is such an important thing. It is the algorithms in these phones are rigged to show you more and more disgusting, perverse content. So you can start by watching Spider-Man, and within 20 minutes, the Spider-Man recommendations will go down the rabbit hole to things that are very, very dirty. And those parents who've seen phones or youth who know it, they see this, right? So adult content pops up on every medium very easily. So putting filters onto your phones, onto your network, and likely just blocking a lot of those websites. It's part and parcel about being a good parent. It's like you wouldn't leave your door unlocked, right? When the kids go to sleep at night, you don't leave their internet unlocked. You have to lock all those things that could be problematic. And of course, we mentioned the smartphone, right? So this is when your hypothesis you asked about in the 90s. A couple of the things that have been posited is especially post 2012. We're seeing a complete difference in how young people behave, their loneliness, their antisocial behaviors, and some researchers are tying this simply to the proliferation of smartphones. So once smartphones came about and they were kind of ubiquitous in society, everyone had one, they're finding that teenagers are less and less in use of hanging out with other people. They're more likely just to sit and binge on this media, and that is causing them all these maladaptive outcomes that we've spoken about. So again, I'm gonna sound like a broken record. Please, 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 please do not give your children smartphones at least until they're, I would say 16 earliest, I'd probably say even older if you had to, and be mindful of the apps that they're joining, right? So I'm trying to think what else from this. There's a lot. Oh, another thing that popped up is that exposure to Islamophobia. So this is a double-edged sword. Sometimes in our communities, we talk a lot about, hey, the anti-Islamic rhetoric in the country, but this can be very damaging to a young person's identity, because young people are trying to figure out who they want to be. And if they're being told all the time that nobody likes Muslims, nobody likes Muslims, nobody likes Muslims, then it's natural to say, well, maybe I don't want to look like a Muslim, I'm a Muslim. So maybe that message is probably not too helpful, and you have to find a very careful way of saying, letting them know the reality of the world without it being something which negatively affects their own identity. Because who wants to walk around with a target on their back, right? Few people, right? Some of us are kind of wired that way. It's like, yeah, come and say something to me, right? But most of us are not like that, right? So so mass media, as you mentioned, right? It's in video games, it's in movies, right? It's in watching adult content. It's in all these different forms that this is seeping in. Whoa, whoa. Okay. It's okay. No problem. No problem.
It's not your fault, it's ours.
So I know we're probably over time now, right? So we should begin to wrap it up, right?
Yeah.
What time is it? Anyway, okay, we'll give it a few more minutes and we'll wrap it up. So let me quickly finish a couple things and I'm done. So people are asking, you asked a good question, well, who are people being influenced by? So back, like, I'm gonna sound old, but back even when I was growing up, right, when I was a child, internet was just coming out, right? So it was like dial-up, right? And you would, like 5th, 6th grade, dial-up comes out and you get excited. There still was no social media, there was nothing, right? So who were young people being influenced by 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago? It was typically by the news. So the news would offer young people models of who to be. So for me, I remember like Bill Gates was a big like persona back then. It's like Microsoft is there and like, he's this, this big tech guru, and so people are like, oh, I want to be like Bill Gates, right? Or I want to be like Michael Jordan, right? There's some athletes, there's some actors, right? There's a lot of people in business in this world. So people used to read like Time Magazine. That's how they were influenced, right? Newspapers, magazines, and some television. Now I want to flip to you and show you who influences young people in the world. This is a map, you probably can't see this one, of the world's top 50 social media influencers. Number 1, Ronaldo. How many of you know who Ronaldo is? Right? Everyone knows Ronaldo, right? Number 2, Justin Bieber. Number 3, Ariana Grande. Number 4, Selena Gomez. Right? Number 5, Taylor Swift. There's nobody here of value. Like, I think the first time you get to like even like a politician, you get to Obama as like number 19, right? This is nothing but the trashiest people in the entire society. So again, so Michael Jordan, he was an athlete. He was very good at basketball. We didn't know about his personal life because there was no social media. If we knew about his personal life, it would have been very different probably, right? But he was somebody everyone admired for his basketball skills. Bill Gates, right, because he was this millionaire tech guru. We knew about their successes, and people would want to emulate, and parents would tell their kids, work hard to be like Michael Jordan or to be like Bill Gates. Now, the young people, this is who they're following on social media. How many? This guy has, I can't see, my eyes are not that good. 517 million followers, 455 million, 429 million, 425 million. I mean, hundreds of millions of views. And so what I asked this to the kids in the college class I teach, how many of you follow these people? And all the hands are going up. I said, what are they telling you about the world? They're not getting the soccer videos from this guy, or they're not getting just the music from the musicians. They're getting every other view about the world, their religion essentially. What they think about gender, politics, this, that, marriage, parenting. This is all what they're doing. And they're giving this on social media, and they're tweeting it every day, and they're tweeting out, their bodies, half naked, and they're doing all these things. And that's what these kids are absorbing. So when you say that these people are influencing our kids, they're influencing them not in the way of like successful professionalism, but in all the filth and the fahisha and like the materialism and the kufr what they believe in. That's what literally our kids are clicking follow, and they're seeing that every single day. And there's so many ayat in the Quran about this, about what the people on the Day of Judgment will say to their followers. So it's funny the word followers is used, right? وَإِذَا تَبَرَّأَ الَّذِينَ تُبِعُوا مِنَ الَّذِينَ اتَّبَعُوا وَرَأَوُا الْعَذَابَ تَقَطَّعَتْ بِهِمُ الْأَسْبَابُ, as Allah says in Al-Baqarah, that the people who were being followed on the Day of Judgment, so all these people, on the Day of Judgment, they're going to tell Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I got nothing to do with all my followers, right? I have nothing to do with it. And the people who are followers will tell Allah, Ya Allah, like allow us to go back so we would never follow these people, right? That's what's going to happen on the Day of Judgment. But in this life, we are very short-sighted, and so these people penetrate into our children's lives, right, and the influence of them. So this is the changes in biographical awareness in the last century. Most influencers are now entertainers. And here's something crazy. Any adult in this room, did you ever dream of being a social media star when you grew up? Did you ever dream of that? Uncle, did you ever think of being like a YouTube star? No, right? Why? Because there was no YouTube, right? But today, 54%, when you ask the survey of teenagers in America, when they say, what would you like to do when you grow up? They say, would like to be an influencer if we had a chance, right? This has now become a thing to be. And this leads to all kinds of things. To be an influencer, for those of you who have social media and you want followers, you know what you gotta do. You can buy followers, right, on Instagram, right? And it makes you look very popular. And half the people I know who have businesses or who try to be popular, they buy 10,000 followers because then it makes them look extra popular and more people. So now you have to be deceptive. You have to start sharing your personal life. You have to take 50 photos of yourself. Make sure you only pick the most glamorous one, of course, right? And all of this is a number on your body image and all these things. And so this lifestyle, right, of social media is very, very corrosive. And I haven't even gotten into schools and any of that stuff, but I'm just gonna stop for now and just ask questions for a bit, because I wanna be mindful of everyone's time and space. Maybe we can even, Salah, if we need to, and if people need to talk, we can talk, but
It's up to you. It's up to
I wanna
you.
be respectful of everyone in the room and
Yeah.
not hold you hostage, of course, right?
Yeah.
So, let's just ask questions for a little bit, right?
Yeah.
Yes?
So my question is actually to you. You having grown up in California, you said, right?
Mhm.
And having gone through the public school system.
Yeah.
What would you say were the most important influences in your life that molded you into being the person you are today?
Mm-hmm.
Was it your parents, peers, was it the Muslim group, or was it
Yeah.
the embassy?
Great question. So I will speak for myself, and again, I consider myself an outlier, just so whenever we see someone who went through the beast and didn't be destroyed, there's an exception, not the rule. For myself, I would say that a couple of inflection points. One was I lived in the dorms when I went to college. So I was 18 years old, I moved from my family's house to UC Irvine. I lived in the dorm, and I had a lot of freedom. So I was curious as to what's out there. And when I saw the filth that freedom gives you, and I say filth, I mean to the 10th degree, I was like, I do not want this, right? And I had then committed myself to let me now re-explore my faith. And then 9/11 hit my sophomore year of college, and it was a very good opportunity. It was an inflection point. So I would say that there's life circumstances, and for me, that dorm experience really was a fork in the road. And I was a rare exception who said, let me go to my religion rather than indulge in that experience. And then, alhamdulillah, I was blessed to have very good mentors in college. And to your first point, the masjid was not helpful in my religiosity. In fact, the masjid was what made me run away from religion growing up. Because I grew up in a masjid where youth were not very welcome. The masjid was very hostile in terms of always being bickering and fighting. And the youth used to just say, this is where our parents go just to kind of, and uncles and aunties go to fight and to kind of all kinds of drama. So for us, it was a very traumatic experience, right? So that's why I'm very passionate about being in masajid and trying to create a new culture for the 21st century of Muslims, right? And because our generation just had really, really toxic masajid. I remember where like fist fights break out in the masjid, and like I was at a khutbah, and like the microphone got yanked out of the wall, and the sound system broke, and you know like chairs were being hit. It was like WWF, right? This is the Granada Hills Masjid in San Fernando Valley. It's very notorious for this stuff, right? So it's trauma, right? And you're like, I don't want anything to do with religion. And then when I realized that the way that religion had been shaped for me was absolutely nothing to do with what Islam was, I was like, okay, good. Now I actually want to be a Muslim, because if it was what I saw in the masjid, I don't want to be that, of course, right? So, but I was blessed. I had some very, very good mentors. In particular, some who were born and raised here, who were African American, who had lived through the civil rights movement, who showed us how Islam can empower society and really change the world. And they helped me see that Islam is a powerful way of being, rather than simply a set of rules of prayer and fasting and kind of just cultural practices, so to speak. So, other questions or comments? Yes.
So there'd sometimes be like at school, there'd be like these people, they'd ask me, why do you wear the hijab? And I know it's like about deen and stuff, but is there like an easier way to like say it to them so they can like understand the meaning of it?
Yeah, great question. So this is where we get into the point I mentioned very early, is that in this culture, why is a question you should get used to hearing and answering. In immigrant cultures, like in Pakistan, right, or in Egypt, in these cultures, people don't typically ask why questions. Like, why do I pray? Why do I have to wear hijab? Why this? It's just kind of taken for granted as part of the culture. So the most obvious answer one can give is because God asked me to do it. But that's not a very satisfying answer to most people, probably even to the person who's doing it, right? And this is important. Everything, so give me a minute to answer this. The first way to think about this for yourself is that everything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has asked you to do is good for you in this life and the next life. So the benefit is for you. I want to be clear. And so where was my young man who asked about salah earlier? The same answer for him, right? When Allah says pray, there you are. No more answering your question. Right? When Allah says Right? You ask why do we salli, right? When Allah says so pray, when Allah says fast, when Allah says do this or do that or don't do this, we have to, first thing is to know Allah does not ask us to do this for His benefit. Right? That's the most important principle that we have to get at. So people say Allah doesn't need me to pray. Allah does not need you to pray. Allah does not need you to wear hijab. Allah does not need you to fast. Allah needs none of this from you. But guess what? You need it whether you know it or not. And I'll give this analogy that it's a little roundabout, but it comes back to your answer. How many of you like chocolate chip cookies in the room? Okay, everyone. What's in a chocolate chip cookie? Give me the ingredients. So come on, some of you who bake cookies.
Sugar,
There's sugar. What else?
butter,
Butter. Flour.
chocolate.
Chocolate chips. You want eggs?
Yeah, eggs.
What else? Could be some milk. What makes it rise? Baking powder or baking soda. What else do you need sometimes? Maybe
Yeast.
some yeast. Maybe some salt. Yeast not usually in chocolate chip cookies, right? But
Metformin.
what is it?
Metformin.
So anyway, now I'm giving this analogy why. What if I said to you, well, you like chocolate chip cookies, right? Here, you take a stick of butter, right? You have some baking soda, right? You eat the eggs, right? And I just give you each of the ingredients, right? So eat it. And I said, here, eat one at a time. Eat the baking soda first. Take a teaspoon in your mouth. Eat it, right? Right. Then take the salt in your mouth. Then take the chocolate in your mouth. Then take the raw eggs in your mouth. And then take the stick of butter in your mouth. It's in a chocolate chip cookie. It's the ingredients of a chocolate chip cookie, right? The analogy that I want to make for you. So this is important because people say, why do I have to do this? And why do I have to do that? And why can't I do this? Why can't I do that? There's a way the cookie comes together. There's the ingredients. There's the amount of the ingredients. You can't put too much egg or too much of anything. It'll ruin the flavor. And it has to bake at a certain temperature for a certain time. I want you to see your deen that way. Everything Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asks you to do, there's a dosage for it. There's 5 salat in a day. There's 1 month of fasting in a year. There's a certain way to dress every single day. There's Quran trade. There's all these things to do. And they are like that cookie. When you do it consistently at the right dosage over time, it gives you become like that perfect cookie that is delicious and it's good and it becomes wholesome is my point, right? It's the end product is what you're looking for. But when you just stop and you just look at each component, you say, man, but just the salt is just gross, right? You may not love every single thing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asks you to do. Allah tells us that in the Quran. He says, "Asa an takrahu shay'an wa huwa khayrun lakum." In fact, I'll tell you something, as a psychologist, we do these studies. People are very bad at knowing what makes them happy and what makes them unhappy. And we do these experiments where we put people into weird situations, and we ask them, how happy do you think you would be to do this? They'll say, oh, I think it's going to be terrible. I'll give you an example. They do these studies. They put people into a gigantic cardboard box, and it's just dark in there. They sit in a chair for 20 minutes. How many of you think that'd be fun? How many think it'd be painful? Some of you? So they do this, and they put the people in the cardboard box, and then when they're done, they ask them, how was the experience? And they actually say, it wasn't that bad. Some people actually say, I actually found it relaxing and enjoyable. Why would someone say that? Why?
Peace and quiet.
Okay, peace and quiet, right? Something like that, right? The point of these things is to say that we don't know what's actually good for us. Now, another example to even add to that. We all like sugar, right? What if you just eat sugar all the time? Are you going to feel gross afterwards? Right? Yeah, it's bad for your body. So your answer, come back to your hijab answer, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the reason why He asks for hijab, He told us in the Quran, I'm not making it up, right? He says, wear hijab so that you're known as a person of modesty, right? Surah Al-Ahzab, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that this is an indicator that I am a person of modesty and decency. Because let's be very blunt. When women choose to dress a certain way, they are choosing to send a signal to the whole world around them. It's a choice that everyone makes. If I'm walking around in a muscle shirt, right? What do I want you to think about me? That I got muscles, right? I could have muscles, but I can hide it, right, in looser clothing. But if I'm wearing, or if I'm walking around without my t-shirt on, right, I want you to say, look at his muscles, right? So we are choosing, when we dress a certain way, to send a signal about who we are, right? And so hijab is the exact same thing. It's a signal about who you are, and Allah is saying, you want to signify that you're a person of decency and of modesty. It's also meant, as Allah says in the Quran, it's helpful for the other person because it keeps them to be more pure. It helps the purity of somebody else to not be exposed, right, to the beauty of somebody else, because then they might want to, they'll act upon that inappropriately. So it's protected for the person who's wearing it, and it's protected for the people who are on the outside, right? So that's one way of thinking about why we wear hijab. And ultimately, right, it's because Allah said, but then there's a wisdom behind all of those actions. So every behavior that Allah tells us to do, there's a wisdom behind it. And everything He tells us not to do, there's a wisdom behind it. And the wisdom is always in doing it, there's good for you, and in not doing the haram, right, there's also going to be benefit for you, right? So I know it was a long answer to your question. So the point is stay the course of these things, right? Sometimes things will be difficult. Salah may not always be fun, right? Fasting may not always be fun, right? Whatever religious activities may not always be the most enjoyable things. But we don't live in a society, our deen doesn't tell us, do what makes you feel good. Our deen is about do what is good for you. And you will find it to be wholesome. And I'll tell you from personal experience, I'm just like many of you, I'm born and raised here. You find some of these things to be very difficult at first. And then after you do it long enough, you realize just how enjoyable these things are. Like you actually are looking forward to doing these things. But it's a process to get there. Anyone here exercise regularly? Right? So tell me when you first exercised, like first time you went for a long run, what happened to you the next day? Yeah, you're aching. You're aching. You're literally aching. I remember I hadn't played basketball in like a year and a half because of the pandemic. So we played a few months ago. First time I played 2 hours straight running back and forth in the gym. I kid you not. 4 days, I could not move. Tuesday, Wednesday, I played Monday nights. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, I literally couldn't get up and down my stairs, right? I felt like I was 90 years old, right? And it's because my body wasn't used to that practice. But I did it every single week, and now I can run for 2 hours, and I feel great. And I wake up the next day, and I feel very, very happy. So, but it took a while. So with your religious practice, you have to also be committed to it in this sense. When you pray and you read Quran and you do these type of things and you do what's right, you'll come to say, there's sweetness in this, there's satisfaction in this. And I would not ever want to leave this behavior. And I voluntarily choose this behavior, not because mom told me, not because dad told me, not because I'll go to Jahannam if I don't do it, but because I enjoy doing that. But you have to be patient. That is the key to all of this. So, all right, last question, then we'll end. Yes.
So part of your talk was, talk to your kids and answer their questions. What if the questions are uncomfortable and you don't know how to answer them?
Great. So he said, what if the questions are uncomfortable and you don't know how to answer them? Two things. Number one is that no questions should be uncomfortable. You should be able to, don't ever send that signal that the question, because then your kids will pick up on the fact that this is becoming awkward. So try your best to not allow anything to kind of rattle you or shake you. What the Prophet was asked, can I have a girlfriend? How much more uncomfortable can you get than that, right? And he wasn't fazed by it and rattled by it, right? Number two is there's two choices for the first is you need to, all parents, we have to figure out what are the dominant things that are on the minds of youth in today's society. You have to be educated upon the happenings in the modern world. And that allows you to begin to start to look into the answers to these by yourself, first and foremost. So I will recommend things like Yaqeen Institute, other places, other imams. Go and ask people of knowledge, look it up on the internet, and arm yourself. And say, I'm ready when I get asked about the things that they should ask about. If your kid never asks you about gender relations, if your kids never ask you about parties and this type of stuff, that means they're just not opening up to you. And that should be a clue that there's a problem with the relationship. When your kid can say, hey, Baba, what about this and what about that? You know that even though it's a tough question, that your relationship's in a good place. So two things. One is find the answer in advance. Two is there's no problem, and it's a good thing to teach our kids that I don't know is an answer. It's an acceptable answer to say, I don't know, but let's find out. And then now you can take the time together and you can look and you can find out that answer. I remember what often happens with me is that kids will ask their parents this question, and then the parent will say, well, let's go, send an email, right, to the sheikh and he'll answer it. Or we'll go to the masjid and we'll talk to them about it. So that's, again, coactivity. Because religious doubts, they stem from not having questions about faith. They stem from not getting answers to those questions. There's a big difference. People think that if someone wonders, oh, what does this verse mean? Or I don't understand this hadith, that's a doubt in their faith. That's not. Ibrahim alayhi salam asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, show me how you bring life to the dead. He believed, he was just curious about the nature of it. Right? So Allah said, let me increase you in your yaqeen with this, right? So take your kid's question and say, this is a chance to once you get the answer that's satisfying, it's a big iman boost. But if you get an answer that's unsatisfying, it's very, very deflating. So make sure you go to the right person to get the right answer. Right? That's the best I can say. Right? I think we are running way over, so I want to be mindful. We will stop, we'll do Isha, and then afterwards we can keep chatting if we need to, too. I appreciate everyone being here today. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect our iman. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to raise our kids with Islam. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect the iman of our children, to protect them from all the fitan in society. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us all the skills to be good parents, to establish good relationships with our kids. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give our children good companionship and good friends. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give them love of this deen. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make them strong Muslims so that they are successful in this life and the next. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun wa salamun ala al-mursalin walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Wa jazakumullahu khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.